Our next speaker is known to many of us, our local passionate campaigner, Darren De Bortoli.
Yeah, look, I got involved in the whole environmental debate from basically day one, and when the whole, I could see the temperature of the water, sorry the pun, rising in South Australia. And I could see that this was going to be a major issue. And when it literally blew up, I thought, oh, here we go. And my first reaction was, oh my God, the Coorong. Anyhow, from those early days, a group of winemakers, rather than concentrating on the social and economic impacts, we thought we'd start looking at the environmental debate. And during that debate, there were people like Les Walland and Stuart McGrath-Kerr. And the first chink in the armour was when Austin Evans from Coleambally, then an engineer, now the mayor, he pointed out that the figures the Australian Conservation Foundation that we're using at their website of the 90% of the wetlands of the Murray-Darling Basin had been destroyed. He questioned that, and he started looking into it, and he was able to chase it back to an oral presentation by Dr. Burns. And it was a misquote, and what he was actually referring was the wetlands of southeast South Australia. Now, when Austin Evans and Coleambally Irrigation informed the Australian Conservation Foundation they were wrong, they didn't remove the misleading information. And it wasn't until Kate Jennings, the sister of Dare Jennings of Mambo fame, got involved in the dispute and wrote a very good article, fantastic article in the Monthly, that the Australian Conservation Foundation finally removed that misleading information. So anyhow, I'm thinking, well, you know, 90% of the wetlands of southeast South Australia have been removed. By the way, in that presentation that Dr. Burns was talking about, New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland, I think our level of wetlands removal was about 70 to 80%. So I kept on following the argument. Then Stuart McGrath-Kerr picked up a little gem saying that 40% of the southeast used to be wetlands, and in fact 94% of those wetlands don't exist. And I'm thinking, well, that's pretty interesting. And then Stuart pointed me out to some work Louise Burge had done in talking about the formation of Bird Island, which Ken Jury had sort of alluded to, and also mentioned that there had been flows coming from the south, and quoted a book by Rob England called Cries of the Coorong. So anyhow, that gets me fascinated. Flows from the south, and I'm thinking one thing you can't lie about is the geography. So I started looking at the geography, and lo and behold, after going through realms of pages on the internet, I came across a little gem. And it was a paper by Dr. Michael Williams of Adelaide University, 1964, referring to the historical geography of an artificial drainage system. Now, the good thing back in the 60s, people didn't lie. The quote there, I'll just go back, by the way. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And thank you, Senator. And that quote actually came from our beloved Kay Hull. And I was talking to her a few months ago and she used that quote. And there's no doubt if Kay Hull had been still the member, she would have been a modern day Joan of Arc leading the charge and nothing would have stopped us. But that's not the case. Now what we've got here is 2 pages taken from Dr. Michael Williams' paper from 1964. And you can show the drains up to 1962. You can see what the drains were doing. These white bits, by the way, are the wetlands, the flats as they're referred to. You can see also on this diagram the various streams that feed in from Western Victoria. And all this water, and that just shows you the extent of the drains done up to 1962. And you can see from this map the flows of the water. All this water flowing through these wetlands is flowing north-northwest. And where's it depositing in? The southern lagoon of the Coorong. This is a more recent, gives you a bit of a comparison of the extent of the drains and what's going on in the southeast. So you've got 1962. This was actually taken from a sign. I liked it because it shows what they're trying to do in terms of re-engineering works with the southeast, which is another story. But you can see that all the blue bits there are the remnants of the wetlands that once pervaded. Like I said, all this white bit used to be wetlands. And that's the map. The little signpost was taken on what basically is a regulator holding back the water at Tilly Swamp, which is the swamp just to the east of the southern lagoon of the Coorong. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to recharge the ground waters of the southeast. It's got to be remembered that the southeast has some interesting geological formations. It predominantly has a limestone base, and anyone knows about limestone, it drains very well. So you can easily see that every wetland used to be recharged by the wetland above it. So you get an idea, all these wetlands, as you'd come down, they drop in elevation. The top elevation of the wetlands is about 200 feet above sea level. Sorry for using 200 feet, but that comes from Dr. Michael Weems's work. So you can easily see how each wetland used to recharge and how the groundwater flows and surface flows into the Coorong were sustainable. And that's the regulator, that's the downside stream of that regulator. So that's holding back all this water, by the way. You can see it, that little blue line there is what they call Tilly Swamp. And there's another swamp above it they're trying to obviously recharge. And that feeds into Salt Creek, which is the surface flows into the southern lagoon of the Coorong. This formation is called a tufa. Now, they're literally limestone pipes that pop up in the southern lagoon of the Coorong, or throughout the whole Coorong, in fact. And that's how the surface, the groundwater used to discharge into the Coorong. Oh my God, they're breeding. A few more tufas. And you can see they're quite clear. They're almost like limestone pipes coming out of the ground in the Coorong. And that's the spot that I took it from. That's only about 10 miles north of Salt Creek. And the reason why I took it from there, was very easy walking distance from the Princess Highway. I was able to get to the Coorong quite easily. So all that outcrop there, that's limestone base that feeds into the Coorong, that was just littered with these tufas. Now the Coorong is 140 kilometres long. If you're curious, if you have a look on Google Maps, there's a place called Bummery Island, Bumyerie. Now Bummery Island is 35 kilometres south of the nearest water mass in the southern lagoon of the Coorong. So it gives you an idea what the pre-European Coorong actually looked like. The pre-European Coorong was in fact in the vicinity of not 140 kilometres long, it would have been in the vicinity of 180, 190 kilometres long, just above basically Kingston. And you can also see from this map, and the answers were always staring us in the face, and this is a crazy thing. How in the hell do you get a geological formation like the Coorong? The only way it could have occurred with substantial groundwater flows and surface flows to push those sand dunes you can see in the distance to the far west, to create those sand dunes that blocks the very powerful Southern Ocean from what should have been the shoreline, and that's where what you can see just in front. So that's 2 to 3 kilometres away. So the groundwater flows had to be massive. The vicinity of the groundwater flows were probably, I had a guess of, no one's corrected me, so I'll still run with it, 4,000 gigalitres. So pre-European flows from the Coorong used to be 4,000 gigalitres, all heading north into the lower lakes. Now, what's the significant 4,000 gigalitres? The volumes, and I can't get any figures on that, but I'll have a stab in the dark. I estimate if the Coorong's roughly, the modern Coorong is now 140 kilometres long, say 2 kilometres wide, 1 kilometre deep, you get a figure of about 280 gigalitres is the volume of the Coorong. The evaporation rate would be that every year, and these figures are quite important, as I'll highlight a bit later on. The lower lakes, the volume of the lower lakes at sea level, by the way, is 1,300 gigalitres. At sea level, Lake Alexandrina is only 2 metres deep on average, and Lake Albert is only 0.9 metres deep. They're exceptionally shallow. And give you an idea, I'm 1.8 metres tall, so you can see the depth of the lower lakes, the average depth of the lower lakes, what it's like. That 0.75 metres is the difference of being able to sail a deep-keeled yacht around the lower lakes and not. And Lake Albert is the one they're really worried about in South Australia. The politicians and everyone I've spoken to, they are pretty reasonable about it. And they're no horror, they just like to be informed. It's the political elite in South Australia that is creating the problems. By the way, the evaporation rates, according to Tim Flannery during the 2006 drought, will have been 1,300 gigalitres. The normal figure they work with is 800 gigalitres. So according to Tim Flannery, during the 2006 drought, we will have evaporated the entire volume had it been pre-European conditions. That entire volume would have disappeared. Now that has a significant impact. Now we have to replace that 13, just say we had a repeat of 2006 drought. We would have to replace that entire volume just to replace the evaporation rate, let alone continue to push water out to sea. So the numbers start escalating, and you can see the stupidity of using a defined number, and Tony Windsor during his report clearly indicated you can't use a defined number. That is sheer stupidity, and I can't understand why people continue with that line of thinking. This is one of the drains, by the way. Those drains that you saw on the map, they constitute, as you could see, numerous drains. This is the Blackford drain. That was taken a bit further upstream. You can see how far the cuts are and how they've created a little levee. And you can see how much water is flowing. That was taken at Christmas, so there's still water flowing through the Blackford drain at that stage. That's Drain L, and that's, like I said, one of many drains in the southeast. All these drains are draining straight out to the sea. Now, the problem that creates is now you've got freshwater discharges going out to the sea, which they never previously went. All that water used to predominantly flow into the Coorong. So the freshwater flows into the sea is basically now killing their seagrasses. And there was a fantastic report called The Impact of Drain Discharges on the Seagrass Beds of the Southeast of South Australia. Now, the interesting thing about this paper was they talked about the flows coming from the south of the Coorong, not from the Murray-Darling system. And if you're worried about the environmental arguments, and is John Dalbroy, our mayor, here? No, good. John questioned some of the figures when I was delivering the figures to the Murray-Darling Basin Authority on a Thursday a few weeks ago. So just for John, I will inform you of where these figures came from. And even if I'd been lying, it would have been nice if you supported me, John. The sedimentation rate in the southern lagoon of the Coorong is now running at 6.4 mils a year. Tenfold increases. The sedimentation rate of the northern lagoon, which has only been kept alive by the waters of the Murray-Darling Basin, is running now at 5 mils a year. These systems are not sustainable. What had happened, just going back in history, there was enough flows going through this system during 1967 and 68 to keep with the barrages closed for 500 days to keep the Murray mouth open. These are flows from the south, nothing to do with the Murray-Darling flows. Then during 82, barrages were closed for 200 days and the Murray mouth closed over. So you don't need to be a rocket scientist to realise they've cut too many drains in down south. And now there's no flows going up from the Coorong. 1985, the South Australian government lists the Coorong as a reverse estuarine system, saying basically the flows now came from the Murray-Darling system. And under that Ramsar listing, they also listed the lower lakes as a freshwater system. They finally concede now, it's taken a while, but they finally concede, yes, the lower lakes are in fact a estuarine system, and we've transferred it into a artificial freshwater system. And thanks to Ken and the work he did back in 2011. So during the floods of 2011, when there was enormous flows going down the system and all the barrages were open, Ken and Ian Rowan had worked out that with a southerly and high tide, or southwesterly and high tide, the sea was still able to push in past those barrages with flood-like conditions. That's inconceivable. During flood-like conditions, all that volume of water going out, but now the barrages have to be open to let all that water out, the sea was able to push in. And all they were doing, they were validating work that Professor Rako had done in 73, 74, and his paper talks about the seawater exclusion from Australia's River Murray. So it's well documented what happened there. Now the Murray mouth, this one, Ken was very kind to take me for a tour of the Coorong, and one thing about the tour of the Coorong, the Northern Lagoon, he pointed out to some birds in the distance. And I'm looking at these birds in the distance, and they're quite a long way off, quite a long way off the shore. And he said, you know something funny about those birds? I didn't know what he was talking about. And he says, they're standing. But anyhow, there's a deep channel that runs through the Coorong Channel, and that's probably, I don't know, Ken, what, a few hundred metres wide and a few metres deep. And that's basically the main water flow for the Coorong. Now, what Ken had pointed out, these are fishermen's huts that originally probably worth squillions of dollars now, but they were originally built, and the Murray mouth at that stage was just to the north of it. Now, the current Murray mouth is considerably further to the north than the pre-European Murray mouth. But it gives you an idea of the build-up of the sand dunes as well that separate the very powerful Southern Ocean from the Coorong. Now, is John Benetti in the room? No, it's not here. Oh, maybe our illustrious Mayor, John Dalbroyd, might be able to explain this to me. Can you explain this one to me, what this is all about? A ex-Liberal Premier of South Australia is paid $800,000 for drought advice. He's paid through 3 separate government departments, and this came from the Sunday Mail in January 2010. And I can't explain it. I don't know why the highest paid money to an ex-Liberal Premier, and this is done during the Michael Rowan Labor government, by the way. If you go back to the '85 registration of the lower lakes and the Coorong under Ramsar, that goes back to the John Bannon Labor government. So they're not looking too good. But to share the love around, we've also got an ex-Liberal Premier involved. Anyhow, maybe you can explain what that was all about, because I can only assume that the advice they'd given was exceptionally good.
Darren, that's absolutely true. Premier Rann, as I recall, spoke to Dean Brown as a former Premier. As you're quite right, he was a Liberal Premier. And Dean Brown at that stage had been doing quite a bit of work with water, and in the eyes of the Premier then, he saw Dean Brown as someone that was an expert.
Yeah, obviously scientific background, Ken. No scientific background. Well, what was his expertise then? Yeah, and I just think that's an idea, because this is the politics we're up against. It's going to be very hard for Senator Madigan to get an inquiry up, but I go back to the original quote about great evils is done when good men do nothing, so I suggest that you persevere. And actually, I'm personally fascinated, because I like to see you put the motion up, and I would like to see the people who vote against it. Because no one that has any decency can vote against an inquiry to look at the truth. How can you vote against such a thing? It's inconceivable. The thing about, anyhow, well, let's talk about Murray-Darling Basin, and we've got all these environmental waterings. So the thing about the Murray-Darling Basin, and as a kid, my father would take me camping along the river. So I've seen the Murrumbidgee since the 60s as a toddler, and I've seen the gradual degradation. Now, we all know where the degradation was mainly coming from. It was coming from the carp. We saw turbidity levels increasing, and as one man described it, John Borlasso, in a letter to the editor, described them as the pigs of the river system. They basically feed on the bottom, stir up all the mud, feed on the vegetation, and they were originally introduced to control the weeds in the river system. Well, the problem is they did too good a job, and they're prolific. They destroy their habitat, and in the process of destroying their habitat, they're decreasing the native fish numbers. Now, interesting thing about the native fish numbers, as we've stopped the wholesale removal of Murray cod from the system and slowly re-establishing their habitats, the carp numbers appear to be slowly declining. And obviously, as an apex predator in the system, we are seeing gradual improvement in the rivers. So I think it's fantastic we keep on allowing dead trees and not removing them from the river system, because that means the sedimentation will slowly build up, and we'll have a shallower river system. And but bloody hell, we're going to have a constraint problem getting all that water down, but we're going back to the natural state. Now, I remember during the beginning of the arguments, Dick Thompson was talking about the trees dying along the rivers. Now, Dick said, the trees aren't dying because of a lack of water, they're dying because of too much water. Now, what we've got with the Murray-Darling Basin, so they're putting these environmental waterings on site that in their natural state, i.e. a dry year, they wouldn't have received water. So we're putting water, but there's no science in terms of the soil type. So if the soil types are leaky, what you're going to do is you're going to slowly increase the water table level. And as you increase the water table level, guess what? You're going to start killing trees. And not only are you going to start killing trees, but you're also going to start pushing salinity in the system. Now, I'm not quite sure how that sort of ties in with how that's good for the environment if we're moving away from natural state to these artificially created environments and slowly destroying our rivers. But anyhow, let's get back to the river. All these constraints, if we increase the flows to the river and increase the volumes of the river, we're going to increase the water table level. Now, if we increase the water table level along the river systems, we're going to start killing trees, and the kill rate of those trees is going to be massive. And to Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, who came to the town and obviously didn't listen to many people, I would say, hey, Sarah, how many trees are you going to kill today? Now, for the Laborites here, they understand the significance of that. The situation is absolutely ridiculous. We do need a national coordination of the river system. Anyone knows anything about California, the system's in complete collapse. Their Artesian water, the soil types, because the water was actually holding up the soil. You're seeing collapses in the level of soil in the vicinity of 1 metre. Roads are actually becoming wonky. California is absolutely a disastrous case. So I'm certainly not arguing for a national coordination of the system, but a bit of common sense wouldn't go astray. And while we're doing it, we should be throwing in the Snowy River, because the Snowy River, I find it absolutely bizarre that we're sending water down for these flows that during a drought would have got little flows, and for the sake of a 1 in 10 year event, why can't we preserve those water in those upstream storages? So we're sending all this river water down. The water that's currently going through the barrages, which I can't get a figure on, Ken, it's the sort of thing that I would think that even an incompetent hydrologist would be able to work out. So how much water is actually going to the barrages is...
One of the things we should realise, and I had hoped earlier, I'm sorry, I'm just cutting in on you just for a moment. We had some graphs earlier. I'm wondering if we could get those up soon. I don't want to crab...
Oh, can we go back to
Yes, yeah, we'll come back to it. I want to show you only 4 graphs in a minute, and I'll explain to you that ocean water is going through the barrages whether they're shut or open. We can prove it.
Going back to the lower lakes, so we've got the sedimentation rates of the Northern Lagoon running at 5 mils a year, 6.4 mils in the Southern Lagoon. Anyhow, the natural state of the barrages, there was a fantastic report June 2000 by the Murray-Darling Basin Commission in those days, and it was basically pushed to have those barrages removed. I know Ken has a different view, and that maybe that's a discussion for South Australians generally. But one of the interesting things they talked about was the sedimentation rates of 4.5 mils a year in the lower lakes. Now, 4.5 mils a year, when you've got at sea level, the natural state of the Coorong is only, of Lake Alexandrina is only running around 2 metres, and you've got Lake Albert at 0.9 metres. It doesn't take very long to see what's going to happen. Now, the only reason why you would have those barrages there to maintain those water levels at a higher level, notwithstanding the Ken's argument about putting quick-acting barrages to maintain, so you can create a estuarine interface without dropping the levels, would be for property development, I assume, around the lower lakes. The problem with currently, and this is the stupidity, I can't understand South Australians. No, and I don't mean the derogatory, I'm talking about the political elite, because they think differently from most South Australians I know, and certainly as me mortals. I have no doubt the South Australian political elite in South Australia have this love affair with Italy, and they love everything about Italy. And they love Tuscany, and they also love the Great Lakes of Northern Italy. Now, I can't help thinking they've got, in their grand vision, they think they're going to create these South Australian version of the Great Lakes of Northern Italy. Anyhow, I can only say to that, they're going to create a Frankenstein version of the Great Lakes of Northern Italy. The sedimentation rates currently, as the situation currently exists, are not sustainable. So what's going to happen in 100 years' time on those marinas on High Marsh Island? You will not have yachts, and you will not even have river boats. You're going to have swamp boats, because that's what's going to happen. The whole thing is just absolutely bizarre, crazy. Yeah. I think I've pretty well covered most of it. It's quite interesting. Just one last thing. I've got the South Australian Select Committee on the Murray River's final report of 2001 July. Quite interesting. They don't talk about the lower lakes in this report. They don't talk about the Coorong. I wonder what's changed. It's funny. And let's get one more sign off. The 2002 drought, the natural state of the rivers would have meant the Murray River during the 2002 drought would have been dry all the way back to Swan Hill. The 2006 drought would have meant all the rivers would have been dry all the way to the headwaters. It just never rained. It was just inconceivable. When you consider what we were able to achieve over that period, and that included even mismanaging of the rivers, of the water systems, we still had water in the river systems. Anyhow, I would hope that Senator Madigan gets his inquiry up. We, the people of Australia, deserve it. The people of the Murray-Darling Basin deserve it. And there's 2.2 million people live in the Murray-Darling Basin. How many families are going to be destroyed one way or another by the current stupidity of this plan? I've got no idea. But I can tell you what, it really upsets me when I see Senator Sarah Hanson-Young complaining about the welfare of the children of the boat people, and fully commendable to her, but she does not give a damn about those families in the Murray-Darling Basin that she is destroying. I just find that absolutely incomprehensible, and thank you very much.
I should remind people that the lower lakes aren't really lakes. They're actually depressions, and you were shown the drainage in the southeast this evening very well, and most of us guys that study these things have got those wonderful drawings. The fact is that when that was formed about 7,000 years ago, they formed those drains were formed, and so were the lower lakes. They were just depressions, that's all they were. They were never meant to be lakes. But our forebears, of course, saw fit to put in some barrages for all sorts of reasons down our end. We know now that if we do take them out, all hell will break loose, and we're certainly not going to do that. Thank you.